Every single night in the ancient world, something happened that feels almost impossible to believe. Around 50,000 Roman soldiers would suddenly stop everything. They stopped marching. They stopped fighting. They stopped expanding an empire. And then right in the middle of hostile territory, surrounded by unknown threats, enemy land, and complete darkness, they did something that most ancient armies could never risk doing. They slept. And what makes this even more unbelievable is that this was not a rare moment. It happened again and again. Night after night. Campaign after campaign. Across mountains, deserts, forests, and foreign lands. No matter how exhausted they were or how dangerous the environment became, the same pattern repeated itself. No walls, no cities, no permanent forts. Just open ground leather tents and silence under the night sky. At this point in history, most armies would be vulnerable, disorganized, and exposed. But the Roman army operated differently, because they were not just a group of soldiers. They were a system, a living, moving, engineered machine designed for survival even in sleep. And yet every single morning, something even more shocking happened. The entire Roman army woke up alive, rested, organized, fed, and ready to march another 30 kilometers like it was routine. This level of consistency is what makes historians still study them today. Because survival in hostile territory is one thing, but repeating survival with precision every single night is something else entirely. So the real question is not that they slept, it is how. Because when we look deeper, we begin to understand that nothing about this was accidental. Not the camp layout, not the security, not the discipline, and not even the way they rested. Everything was structured, everything was planned, and everything was controlled. It was a military system so advanced, so disciplined, and so precise that modern armies still study its principles today. A system that could turn empty land into a fully fortified city in under 4 hours every single night for months on end. And that is where the real story begins. Because sleep was not the end of the Roman day. It was part of their strategy, a carefully designed phase of survival before war began again. The Roman soldiers' relationship with sleep did not begin at sunset. It began much earlier while the army was still on the move. Even before the march ended, specialized military engineers called mensores rode ahead of the main force. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were planners, surveyors, strategists. Their mission was critical. They selected the campsite before the army arrived. They measured the terrain. They marked the boundaries. They planned the entire layout in advance. And this is what changed everything. Because when the army arrived, nothing was uncertain. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no chaos that usually comes when thousands of tired men try to settle in one place. So by the time the first exhausted soldiers arrived, there was no confusion, no chaos, no wandering, no argument over space, only order. Flags and stakes already marked every section of the camp like a pre-designed blueprint. Imagine arriving after marching 30 kilometers. Your body is exhausted. Your shoulders are heavy from equipment. Your feet are hurting. And instead of searching or thinking, you simply follow a system that already knows where you belong. That is what the Romans created, a system that removed decision-making from exhaustion, because tired soldiers do not need choices. They need instructions. And that is exactly what the Roman camp provided. The Roman military camp, known as the castra, followed an identical structure every single night, no matter where the army was. It was not random, it was not flexible. It was standardized military architecture. Every camp looked familiar. Every camp felt predictable. And every camp functioned the same way. The Principia Command headquarters always stood at the center. The main road via Principalis always ran east to west. The secondary road via Praetoria always ran north to south. Every soldier knew exactly where everything was. Every unit had a fixed position relative to this grid. And this mattered more than people realize. Because in exhaustion, confusion becomes dangerous. And in war, confusion can become fatal. Because a soldier returning after marching 30 kilometers carrying heavy equipment does not want decisions. He wants certainty. Walk, drop, gear, sleep. That is it. The Roman system removed thinking entirely at the end of exhaustion. And this principle is what made everything else possible. Ancient writer Vegetius, 4th century AD, described the camp-building process in detail. And it reads like engineering precision, not improvisation. First, the perimeter was dug. A deep trench, roughly 3 meters wide and 2 meters deep, surrounded the entire camp. This was not symbolic. It was defensive engineering. The excavated soil was not wasted. It was piled inward to form a rampart, a raised barrier that increased protection. On top of it, soldiers placed sharpened wooden stakes, known as pila muralia, carried as part of every soldier kit. These stakes transformed the perimeter into a defensive wall. Within just a few hours, a full defensive wall existed. Not later, not tomorrow, that same night. This speed is what makes Roman logistics legendary, because most ancient armies struggled to build even basic shelters. But the Romans built fortresses from nothing, every single night. Once the perimeter was complete, the interior became a living machine. Tents were arranged in strict rows. Streets were left open for movement. Cooking areas were assigned zones. Latrines were placed downwind for hygiene. What had been empty land just hours earlier was now a functioning military city. And this city did not exist for comfort. It existed for survival and readiness, because at any moment war could begin again. Each Roman tent, called a papilio, was built from treated leather, not canvas leather. This choice was not random. It was practical survival engineering. Because canvas rots in wet conditions, leather survives seasons of war. Each tent used the hides of around 10 calves, stitched tightly and waterproofed with oil and animal fat. It was heavy, around 40 kilograms, but it was durable, reliable, and built for long campaigns. Inside each tent lived a contubernium, a unit of 8 soldiers. These 8 men were everything to each other. They ate together, they marched together, they fought together, they slept together. This was not just structure. It was survival psychology. Because in war, trust is not optional. It is life or death. Inside each tent space was organized with strict discipline. Weapons stored at the entrance. Sleeping area kept clear. Equipment stacked in designated positions. This ensured one critical advantage. If attacked at night, soldiers could wake and grab weapons instantly. No delay, no confusion. Just response. Even sleep had combat readiness built into it. The Roman night was divided into 4 watches vigiliae. Each watch lasted about 3 hours. Every soldier participated in rotation. 3 hours guard duty. Several hours potential sleep. But the key was enforcement. Nothing was left to chance. Guard duty was not optional. It was mandatory survival responsibility. Each watch used a wooden tablet called a tessera, carrying the night password. It was passed between posts continuously. If anything failed, missing guard, incorrect password, abandoned post, investigation began immediately. And consequences were severe, because survival depended on discipline. Sleeping on duty was considered a threat to the entire army. Punishment could escalate to collective discipline by fellow soldiers known historically as fustuarium. Harsh, yes! Effective, absolutely. Because every soldier understood one truth. If one guard failed, everyone could die. Not everyone in the camp slept equally. At the center stood the praetorium, the command headquarters. This was where generals slept, surrounded by guards, maps, and constant security. A lamp burned throughout the night. Centurions, professional officers, had their own smaller tents positioned to monitor their men. They did not sleep deeply. They supervised, they enforced discipline at every hour. Compared to medieval armies, the difference was dramatic. Medieval camps were often unstructured, poorly guarded, vulnerable to night raids. Roman camps were the opposite. They were fortified every night, guarded in rotation, built with identical precision, ready for instant defense. Even a smaller Roman force could hold off a much larger enemy until morning. Before sunrise, the camp was already in motion. A trumpet sounded, then 3 signals followed. Wake and prepare, dismantle tents, form marching lines. Within 2 hours, the entire fortified camp disappeared. Tents were packed, trenches left behind, stakes reused, formation ready, and the army was already moving again. The Roman army did not treat sleep as rest. They treated it as strategic fuel for conquest. A well-rested army marches farther, fights harder, reacts faster, makes fewer mistakes. So every night of secure sleep was not comfort. It was military advantage. So when you look at this system, ask yourself, what was the hardest part of life in a Roman marching camp? Was it the endless guard duty, the cramped leather tents, or the fact that the entire empire depended on waking up alive every single morning?